we need to approach Bitcoin in this different and radical way that's really trying to educate people about the political power that's found in Bitcoin, just as opposed to the economic power. And, in the theme of the show, like, to me, that's the real transformation of value, is when you get that, like, yeah, Bitcoin absolutely has an economic value, but like the social and political value has a higher one than the economic value.
Hello, I am Cody Ellingham, and this is the Transformation of Value, a place for asking questions about freedom, Bitcoin, and creativity. My guest today is Erik Cason, author of Cryptosovereignty, the encrypted political philosophy of Bitcoin. Erik is a regular speaker and essayist, focusing on the social, political, and philosophical aspects of Bitcoin. Erik, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back on. I hope we won't be disturbed by any cats or babies this time.
I just finished reading Hunter S. Thompson's 1971 Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Uh-huh. And if I may quote Thompson, as he laments on the idealism of the hippies in the 1960s, there was a fantastic universal sense that whatever we were doing was right, that we were winning. And that, I think, was the handle. That sense of inevitable victory over the forces of old and evil, not in any mean or military sense. We didn't need that. Our energy would simply prevail. We had all the momentum. We were riding the crest of a high and beautiful wave. So now, less than 5 years later, you can go up on a steep hill in Las Vegas and look west, and with the right kind of eyes, you can almost see the high water mark, that place where the wave finally broke and rolled back. Erik, Bitcoin 2025, Las Vegas, what sense do you have?
Yeah, there's a bit of a meta fractal in that. It's funny because being at Las Vegas last week for the Bitcoin conference, specifically being on psychedelics at the Bitcoin conference, there was a bit of that energy. I hate to say it, but it was mostly sycophants that were there. That being said, like I think we're using them more than they're using us, but there's an interesting questionability right now where I'm kind of like, who's fucking who? And I think there's a lot of deep mutualism right now. I'm pretty sure Bitcoiners come out on top, but I think this SBR and corporate treasury thing is relatively dangerous to the vision. But that really is a greater question about how Bitcoiners are going to let this play out in the long run. And I think it's really interesting that the storage of narrative value versus the exchange value, I think, is starting to become a bit contentious. And it's not to say that there isn't good overlap there, and that's kind of why we've found ourselves with strange bedfellows. But there's a lot of weird stuff going on right now, and that I'm finding myself in bed with some people that I didn't expect to be, and I find myself not willing to get into bed with some people that I would have thought I would be willing to do that with.
Interesting. You said to the Las Vegas Sun, you were quoted in the Las Vegas Sun as saying, you believe Bitcoin is entering a dangerous period with the industry getting close to government officials. Bitcoin is establishing their own party as the only way to maintain a radical, truly third-party political idea. This seems to, though, feed still into the idea of party politics, of the so-called system. What are your thoughts on that?
It absolutely does. Unfortunately, the Sun, I wasn't able to sit down with them and have a longer dialogue. Maybe I should have. They reached out to me for comment, but I didn't want to because particularly newspapers like that, I have much less trust. It's funny because a Wired journalist reached out and I did speak with them because I feel a little bit better about that. I couldn't pinpoint why exactly. So when I say party politics, while it would look like the framework of something like a traditional Republican or Democratic Party, I'm actually speaking about a different form of the political, insofar of that, whatever third party I'd want, it's being voted in, that's not the objective. Getting voted in is the validation that we would have, the leading kind of premise, but this is very much built off of the thesis that Vladimir Lenin presented in State and Power, which was like his book that was pretty much on like how he was going to organize the Russian Revolution and do that. And in that, he first presents his theory of vanguardism. And what I think is interesting is that like we're essentially hijacking a Leninist communist ideology, like for sort of the most radical form of like capitalism that you could ask for. And I think in that, like, the idea of building the party is explicitly not to be like a third party to get voted in to like play the same game, but it's more of like, we're a radical alternative. The only reason you're electing us is to essentially validate that like you want us to overthrow the government in a revolutionary capacity. Like the sort of party that I'm talking about, what I'd want to do is actually focus explicitly and only on states' rights. And I would want to try to get through 35 different American state legislations, essentially an article to amend the United States Constitution to end the Federal Reserve unilaterally and push all monetary making power to individual states. And so Article 5 of the United States Constitution has a clause in it that states can actually ratify and amend the United States Constitution directly with no federal oversight. And that's never actually been done in all of American history. Anytime that we've gotten close to passing an amendment that way, the federal legislature has freaked out and just passed the amendment unilaterally on their own accord because they've never wanted to actually have to deal with what would most likely cause a constitutional crisis. Because based on the Constitution, it's very clear that the 10th Amendment asserts anything that is not empowered to the federal government should only belong to state governments. And like we're so far past and beyond that. So my quote, third party, it would be explicitly about radicalizing and empowering state legislature politics like on this third party perspective, precisely to try this new tactic of ratifying the American Constitution, essentially to strip the federal government of most of their power and shove that power back to the states. It's a pretty outlandish idea, but I kind of think we're at the place that it's time for some outlandish ideas.
Yeah, that's fascinating. This Article 5 of the US Constitution, have you got some examples of times when that has gotten close to the states ratifying and then the federal government has come in? What are some of the famous examples of this that you know of?
Yeah, one is I actually think that women's suffrage was first going towards that. And I think when they got to 30 states, that's when it went through that way. There's a number of interesting ones, too, that are still like in a quasi-state that in theory states could actually still ratify those. And a great example is there's one that's called Article the First. It was actually the very first amendment that was ever passed by the United States federal legislature. And then it went into a pending state where it needed to be ratified by 2/3 of the states. And so like Article the First never was ratified, but in theory it could be. And that would be really interesting because that explicitly states that no federal representative will ever represent more, in the House at least, will ever represent more than 50,000 people. So like that would mean that the United States House would consist of like 6,200 representatives or something like that. I think another example was it might have been the 25th Amendment that stipulates that like if the president is like mentally handicapped, that like they can't continue to be president. So like essentially we've seen a number of different places where this has happened. And so I think if anything, it could cause for a constitutional crisis because like that's kind of what we're gunning for. And that's kind of as like we got different houses to pass this, that would be like, yeah, like we are actually going to ratify the United States Constitution. There won't be federal oversight. There can't be judicial oversight. And what's interesting is there was a 1907 Supreme Court decision that was along this lines where they, because in Article 5 it says not only can they ratify the Constitution, but they can also actually call for a constitutional convention directly. And so that was the one that the federal judiciary was like, that like can't happen, that's like unconstitutional. But I think even if you did that, it would end up becoming really questionable about what would happen in that.
Well, look, Pulling on that thread, and I guess coming back to Hunter S. Thompson, it's really interesting. I just was reading through it again briefly in preparation, and there's this scene, if you are familiar with the book, where he's at the National Drug Convention, and there's like 1,000 police officers, and he's like infiltrated the main character's infiltrated this place, and it's this kind of, it just seems so relevant to what we just witnessed with the Venetian, with Bitcoin 2025. These people assembling in the desert, these politicians, these apparatchiks, these different political people, and then the old school cypherpunk Bitcoiners are kind of like, well, what happened to our movement, dude? And I think it's fascinating because I wonder what your thoughts are on that relationship with the hippies and the 1960s that Thompson laments about, and how it never really had the political power to do anything. And so in the end, it just sort of fizzled out. And how does this relate to what we know about Bitcoin?
Yeah, there's a pretty similar dangerous trajectory in that, interestingly enough, the hippies did absolutely have the power early on, and in the early 1960s, from the active movements that I'm trying to remember the exact student movement that was the most radical that ended up sort of asserting the civil rights movement. The hippies movement came out of the civil rights movement, and that's really important to relate. And so they had actually proved that they had a fair amount of political power, and if they could have kept their organization in radicalism, they probably could have ran through with that. But I also think after the 1978 Democratic Convention, where it was very clear that the powers that be were going to use violent force to the full veracity that they could use it, and I think that's when a lot of people decided to roll over on it. And so with Bitcoin being on a similar trajectory, I think early on we were quite organized and hardcore towards the cypherpunk principles that we're representing. But as we watched number go up, as we've been placated like that, very similar to the civil rights movement of hey, you guys got a couple wins under your belt. Maybe it's time just to relax and enjoy where you're at and the amount of money that you've got and the new securities that you have. And I think this is actually probably the most dangerous place because Bitcoin is designed to be peer-to-peer money, not a new basis for a state form money. And I think it's extremely dangerous in anybody's hands. I don't want any nation states to own Bitcoin. And I don't care if it's El Salvador, China, the United States, or whomever. My political paradigm is very much divided this way, not this way. So I think it's all peoples everywhere against all nation states everywhere. I think the superfluous differences between conservative and Republican, between conservative and liberal, I think is frankly pretty much bullshit. Because we're now well past the end of history where this mutilated form of neoliberalism is what rules everything everywhere, including places like North Korea. I don't care that they call themselves a communist state. They are part of a neoliberal global world order that they have had to find a place within. And so that's the mission that I'm always very pedantic about is I don't care about any nation state. I care about people. And so for me, Bitcoin is always a movement about utilizing the global apparatus that is the internet to unify all people everywhere in one economic collective against all governments everywhere. It doesn't matter if it's the Chinese yuan, the South African rand, or the United States dollar. It is all part of a bullshit fiat game that is fundamentally designed for governments to rob you through a very obtuse methodology that very few people really understand.
Yeah. It reminds me of another quote from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. The radio was screaming, "Power to the people, right on." John Lennon's political song, 10 years too late. And I reflect on, as you mentioned, there's a focus on these Bitcoin strategic reserves, companies getting on their balance sheet, these large corporates getting involved, and the very real accusations that people like Michael Saylor, these other characters that we see dancing around, are in fact apparatchiks, members of the state in a sense. And I'm just curious whether there's any personal encounters, conversations you had that you're happy to share that sort of maybe give some insight on the nuance to this idea that there is an infiltration, that there's various factions within this project.
Well, I think it's important to understand that there's a whole multitude of players, and like David Bailey's a perfect example. Bailey is a Bitcoiner through and through. Like his approach and strategy towards how to hyper Bitcoinize the world is fundamentally and radically different from mine. Like he wants to do it through and with the state. And with that being said, like my methodology wouldn't have gotten Ross out of prison. And that's like a very important win that like I don't have a very good response to. And then people like Michael Saylor, like I think it's really important that everybody understand like anything that you've ever seen of Saylor's like that is a manufactured image that he knows and understands and is masterful at pulling off. I've had a number of private conversations with him that like I like him a lot, and I honestly think like he's more of a triple agent than anything in terms of that like he is working for the state, but like he's doing it because he has a chip on his shoulder and like he wants Bitcoin to be successful because of all of the stuff that he openly speaks to and is very true for him. If that like maybe he's actually like a quadruple agent because like in that he really wants the state to get Bitcoin. Like I don't know. And it's similar that there's been other peoples that I have had feelings like this, but ultimately if I zoom out and go, well, where's the alignment? And it's like, yeah, like Saylor has done more to promote the idea of Bitcoin as a storage of value than probably anybody else. Is that positive sum for Bitcoin? Yeah. Does that negate his work if he is working with the state? I don't think so. Because at the end of the day, like, I actually think that number go up is really important. And this is like the biggest Trojan horse strategy is that like it's important to understand that like in the Trojan War, the Greeks were very open with the Trojans about like, hey, if you take this thing in Troy, it will destroy you. Like that absolutely will happen. But don't worry, you'll never actually get it inside of Troy because we made it so grand and so powerful that you just can't do it. And they're like, well, fuck it. Like, we got to bring the horse in. And so, like, we've warned them what'll happen. And so, like, I think we get everybody piling on in corporations. They start... Because, like, now it's clear that the $300 trillion bond market is, like, in play. And there is an arbitrage play if you have a corporation that has access to that form of debt. And with that, like, Michael Saylor is doing the play. We now have Metaplanet doing the play. Like, there's a lot of copycats coming out. And I think that's going to work really well for them for a little bit. But the problem is that this actually causes for the hyperinflationary death of fiat itself. And while we have seen that happen, we have not seen a global superpower, particularly one that is the basis of the entire monetary system, such as the Bretton Woods or Bretton Woods 2. We haven't seen what happens when that fully outstrips it. We had a soft default in 71, and we saw the fallout of that, which dramatically altered the economy. But now we're talking about a real hyperinflationary crisis, and these prior ones, people didn't actually have an exit ramp, whereas now we do have an exit ramp. So, like, I think what's coming is going to be extremely severe and significant, and while it's going to work well for first movers on a corporate scale, it also introduces a existential threat to Bitcoin, because, like, I totally think MicroStrategy's Bitcoin and Coinbase and all the other exchanges, like, it will get seized under a 6102 style order, where, like, they will take your Bitcoin, you will get USDC or whatever shitcoin, CBDC they want to give you in exchange for that, and then we'll watch Bitcoin go from, like, 5 million to 30 million within, like, a week. And I think at that point, that's when, like, stuff starts kind of falling apart at the seams. And if we have a robust enough peer-to-peer Bitcoin economy, we might slow that down. But I that's the direction that I see playing out. And so while there's a lot of these sycophants that I really don't agree with their worldview, I think it's self-serving to me at this point in that, like, they're taking the horse into Troy for me.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that sentiment. You know, these guys are working for me and you, and there's a kind of powerful reorg of the base layer where these treasuries and these systems are kind of getting the foundation taken out, and then sort of a little bit like Indiana Jones, he sort of swaps out the skull for the sack, and it's a little bit like that. I think, you know, this Bitcoin is starting to harden beneath these institutions in ways that are maybe hard to really visualize, but you can kind of feel it, I think. And I guess coming back to Saylor, to this idea of the Fed, I had a conversation with a friend who sort of is a little bit deeper in the weeds with this stuff than me, and he said that, it seems to him as if the US government is setting up strategy to be some kind of Fed 2.0, or at least the contingency for it, that the likes of Coinbase, these other organizations, as you say, they're being set up as a central institution that could be 6102 if need be, but at the very least they're sitting there in the wings ready to be the next thing if need be. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on I guess the reality of that. Is that a centralized directive? Is that just emergent from the deep state? Like, what? How do we make sense of this?
I think it's very clear that the dollar is dying, and that like it will die, and I think everybody's aware of that. I think the idea of going back to gold is pretty appealing to a lot of people, but I think also like it's pretty clear that chessboard is set up in a way for the Russians and the Chinese to win. So I think anybody that understands realpolitik from an American standpoint understands that that's a no-go. Furthermore, like the work that David Bailey's and other individuals have done is like they have made a very strong case for separating Bitcoin from crypto in a whole. And so like I could very much see them move in the direction that and also, just to be clear, like Mark Goodwin's Bitcoin dollar thesis, like I think he fucking nailed it. And that like essentially like Bitcoin is going to end up being the rails that run the CBDC that will become like the new Bretton Woods. I think we'll get some weird fixed rate of exchange between the various currencies, and like this will be the method that Bretton Woods is set up. The thing that I think is really different and powerful, though, is very similar to the system that governed us between 1932 and 1971, is that like people still held gold and you could still take payment in gold, and gold was highly deflationary through that period. Difference is that back then you had to have an actual gold coin that could pretty easily get seized from you and had all the classical things, whereas like we still have Bitcoin. We still have capacities to upgrade Bitcoin if ossification hasn't totally happened. And even if ossification has happened, like we have very powerful secondary layers. And I think that those secondary layers are going to become more primary, because also like Lightning can do some pretty fantastic and powerful stuff, particularly on the privacy preserving front, in addition to like Bitcoin's pretty brittle right now in terms of what we're doing with it. And like we really haven't even tapped very heavily into like what Taproot can do, what Taproot assets can do, some of the more powerful things that are reserved in the protocol that I think are really important and special. That like I think as this cat and mouse game escalates, I feel pretty confident that like we're going to find that while they can still lock down this system pretty hardcore, it's inherently leaky because of the structure of both Bitcoin and of cryptography itself. And so like that's the thing that gives me long-term faith, is that like cryptography is like an operable premise for like how the laws of the universe and mathematics works. Like it doesn't matter how powerful the state is or how great their quantum compute strategy becomes. Like it doesn't augment the fundamental nature of what cryptography is. And so I feel quite confident that like as the cat and mouse game escalates, like we're going to see some new and interesting innovations. And like it's really important to understand like in the block size wars, like there wasn't like some thoughtful dialogue that happened between all of the parties at a round table, but it was like after that shit happened and it seemed like they were going to murder Bitcoin with the shitty agreements that they made. That's when we had this hero Shaolin Fry come up on a non that nobody knows, who was like, hey, I got this different solution that we could use. And everybody rallied behind that. And so like, this is one of my other theses that I have a long, like unpublished essay around, is that like, I essentially think like the next great heroes of Bitcoin are going to return to what Satoshi originally was. Like, I think they will be anons. There will be people that explicitly will be anons because they understand the political power that is found there. And they'll understand the only way that they can actually represent and push forward what they want is by being a nobody. And I think that that'll become a praxis and a power for like a new political paradigm. That will be kind of part of this Orange Party thing that I was talking about, is that like I think anons are going to become these very powerful and interesting actors in a digital future that's going to be pretty wacky, frankly. And so yeah, I feel pretty great about the direction that it's going, because like, while it's scary, and I do think like you're gonna get the horse in Troy, they're gonna have their big party, we're gonna see $1 million Bitcoin, and everybody's gonna think it's great. And it's like after $1 million, like between 1 million and 10 million, I think that's when people will go, oh shit, like Bitcoin is too valuable now. Like, how do we slow this down? And they'll be like, wait, that there aren't brakes on this? And they'll be like, yeah, like that's like how it's designed. And they'll be like, oh shit. And they'll be like, well, just cut it off at the exchange level. And they'll be like, no, you don't understand. Like people are doing this peer to peer. Like this isn't an exchange thing. People are like using this other freak protocol, Nostr, to like do these exchanges, but like we can't find these people. And I think like that cat and mouse game escalates up to a place where like pretty much all of the classic panoptic and surveillance powers just start to break. And I think because like there's no such thing as like good police work anymore, because they've leaned so heavily on the technology that like it's really going to kind of fuck stuff up in a way that like I'm really excited about.
Interesting. The vanguards.
Yep.
I want to come back to this piece on the exchanges, Erik. Your earliest work with Coinbase, when you first started your Bitcoin journey. I'm just curious, maybe we could dwell on that, because now we are seeing this anointing of Coinbase as, or we have seen the anointing of Coinbase as the custodian for a very large amount of Bitcoin. And I don't know if you've had much to do with Bitcoin and with Coinbase in recent years, but what's your take on what that institution means? Has it been penetrated? What is the viability of it?
I mean, so I stepped out in late 2017 after the block size wars. I was really disgusted with the choices that were made there. In addition to like, I knew the nightmare that was going to come out of the fork was going to be horrific, which I heard it was. And since then, like I've had a pretty big chip on my shoulder about the direction that they've carried things. I think it's pretty natural that they are that custodian. And furthermore, like the co-founder at my new company was like one of the key architects of setting up Coinbase's cold storage. So like I know that they did that right and that they were very skilled at it. So like I don't think Coinbase is going to like lose anybody's coins at some point in time. With that being said, like I'm not worried about Coinbase getting hacked. I'm worried about them getting 6102'd. And that's like a very different problem that very few people have actually worked on or solved. And in all honesty, it's like one of those things that like this became a large enough existential question that when my best friend and co-founder Jesse approached me, he was like, we can either solve what we've came to call the honey badger's dilemma, which is do you hold your own keys and take on the risk of a wrench attack? Or do you give your keys to a custodian and risk them being 6102'd? And he was like, we either solve this problem or Bitcoin's a giant LARP. It's all bullshit. And I believe that we have found the solutions to be able to actually address this in a meaningful way, but it's also really risky. And I'm like, I can't help but also see that like, I have this strange story arc where I seem to be like one epoch in front. Like I have this weird story where it's like I spent the first and second epoch of Bitcoin like helping build Coinbase. In the third epoch, like Coinbase became what it was, and like now in this next epoch, it's like kind of the evil empire. And like in the same thing with like like I helped build Unchained. I think it's a phenomenal company that's done so much good for Bitcoin, but there is also a risk of 6102 that could happen to a custodial company. I also think it's really unfortunate that as any collaborative custody companies that you work with, you have to dox your UTXOs to them. These are all really dangerous honeypots. And so like one of the non-starters for us at Vora is that like, we never want to know your UTXOs. And so like, that's one of the reasons that we're building essentially what's going to be the world's most secure computer, is because we want that to run a full node that's always connected. And like, we will implement silent payments from day one. And that means that like, I will never learn your UTXOs, and that's how it should be. Same thing with preserving privacy for like where your physical location is like, we're going to use ZKPs to like help us do that, and these are all really important technologies that have really only gotten built over the last, 3 to 5 years, really, that I think is one of the most important iterations that happen. So like, I think Coinbase was a powerful and important part for the development of Bitcoin and getting it in the hands of as many people. We've now evolved past that. And I take the idea of self-sovereignty with your Bitcoin very seriously. And I also know that like it's time for the next iteration. That like, as much as I have secured my Bitcoin with multi-sigs, have it distributed amongst different jurisdictions, like that's a high bar for most people to attain. And we need to figure out, how do we create a secure solution that allows for you to respond to whether somebody is directly threatening you with personal violence and trying to like rob you at home, or if the nation state itself is coming along saying, hey, give us all your Bitcoin. We have to figure out how to solve this in a meaningful and thoughtful way. And that's essentially why I've chose to go build this company. It's, while I do think it is a massively valuable company on the long term, I'm not doing this for the money. I'm doing it because like we need tools like this if Bitcoin is actually going to survive in the way that we want to see it.
Yeah. So that's your company, Vora.
Vora.io is the website.
Yeah. Is this something you're? It's now public. You've announced.
Yeah.
That this is a project?
So Vegas is kind of where we did the soft launch. Okay. Unfortunately, one of my co-founders he had a health issue, so like we were gonna do all of our fundraising and stuff while we were there, but it was more of a soft launch, and I think that worked out really well because we can start having the dialogues. And this really just came out from robust conversation with lots of Bitcoiners, and also, frankly, like our significant disappointment that we found with Bitcoin-only companies. Because, I keep running into this narrative with individuals where they will go work for a Bitcoin company that's like hardcore committed to Bitcoin. They will build the most radical cypherpunk tools, and they will find, because of all of the normies in the company, they'll go, whoa, hang on. Like, we can't take on that risk, or this is too much, or normal people don't care about privacy, whatever it is. And a great example, like my co-founder, he was working at BitKey. When he came in, very committed to the project. He's still good friends with a lot of people, really believes in what they're building. It's a different threat model. And like one of the things that was very clear that he was disappointed in is that like, because it doesn't have a screen, that opens up a really big risk, particularly if your phone's been pawned. Because like you can't validate it directly on the device. And like, that's just a non-starter. And so for him, that was really difficult to work with. He was really hoping in the feedback that the company had gotten in the fallout of that there would be strong changes. And he found that that wasn't the case. So that's why he was like, if we want to do this, we have to build it ourselves. And that's kind of one of the primary things that we lead with Vora is like, we have a great investor artifact, which is just like a 20-page essay on what we're doing. And we start with like, Vora is first and foremost a philosophical company. And part of that is what does it mean to be in a world now that we have a global, distributed, decentralized internet and a global, decentralized, distributed money? What does that actually mean for humanity on a whole, and how does that transform the future that is available to us? And we believe that using this technology, if it is done right, and we protect these core values of Bitcoin, such as decentralization, as privacy, as using robust cryptography, that there is a real opportunity that we could actually transform not only the internet, but what the political stage of the globe looks like on a whole, and not just for now, but forever. And so one of our key goals is that like, we believe by 2045, like there will be a Vora server in every home or something similar to it. Because the other one that we're dedicated to is like, we are building from silicon to software, the full stack of open source, transparent, verifiable computational hardware and software. Because without something like that, it is always going to be possible for the state to use 0 days and other tertiary attacks to steal people's Bitcoin. And we want to create something where we can go use this, store your Bitcoin and personal data on it. And the only way that this is ever going to get compromised is by compromising the full security architecture that we think will be extremely challenging for any actor, whether it is criminal or state.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and it's awesome to hear that you guys have soft launched this project. It's coming together, and you are building this in the United States, or what is your plans from the business side structuring this?
Yeah, this is actually kind of one of the other interesting strategies is that we're building this in the United States with, and it might seem like a misnomer, but we actually feel like the United States has the strongest privacy protections that they have. So one of the things that we've developed is a PIN-based code system that you can actually derive a PIN from like a strong, long, cryptographically secure key using this methodology that Jesse developed. And what's really important about that is when you pair that with a key so that you have this PIN on top, like that's actually something that's constitutionally protected in the United States. And so one of our other strategies with sort of dovetailing on the Orange Party thing is like, we want to partner very strongly with states to protect people's civil rights, to essentially say and we've seen this already on the front that with some bills that have been passed, and we've been looking at different states that have passed strong rights to individuals that own Bitcoin, but that we really want this to come to a head where at some point governments do seize a Voravolt and they do say, hey, you're compelled to decrypt. And we'll be able to say, well, A, that's not actually true. And B, even if we wanted to, we don't have the ability. We don't know anything about the customer. We don't know how much Bitcoin they have. We didn't even know they owned this thing until you came to us. And to us, that's really important is like, we want to build a company where we are not any form of a threat vector to our clients. And in fact, because of the way that we build it, we empower and strengthen them in a unique and different way that other products don't offer at this time.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And I look forward to seeing how that emerges with Vora. Something I want to come back to, I think there's this implicit idea when we talk about hyper-Bitcoinization or Bitcoin for the people, that there is this kind of mass movement that may take place. And I wonder whether we can critique that a little bit, because I sometimes look around me, I'm on the train, I'm amongst the people, and I realize, man, they don't understand. We're still early. Will they ever understand? Or is this the emergence of a new kind of society where we move away from sort of the democratic, equal sort of take that we've had for the 20th century and move towards more of a class-based system, believe it or not, that maybe is the UTX holders and those who don't have UTXOs, sort of a difference in the way society works. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, part of my worldview is that, like Francis Fukuyama nailed it in 1992, and he was like, hey, the last man of history, it is a liberal. Liberalism has totally won. This is the end game. And I think that's true, and it played out up until September 11th, 2001, where we realize liberalism transforms into a form of neoliberalism that, like, inherently is... it's a gigantic lie, and it wants to tell you all of this stuff about democratic rights and equality. That's like total bullshit. That now, like, you can't say something openly like, hey, like, I actually believe fascism's the correct political system. Like, that is such a non-starter, and it is so taboo. And the reason why is because fascism's actually the answer. And the reason why is because we need strong, powerful leaders who go, not only are you wrong about money, but like your approach to it is absolutely idiotic and insane. And while you like talk about your liberal values, you like vote for a blue party that goes and murders people around the world just as much as the red party. So like, you actually shouldn't be allowed to say anything about the political system because like your opinions are frankly just that, invalid. And that's one of the great things about Bitcoin is it invalidates those political opinions with an economic solution. And again, kind of on the Orange Party side of things, like, I want to see a radical and powerful movement that, like, we're not interested in having discussion. We're interested in telling people what's happening because, like, that's what Bitcoin is. And yeah, like, I'm interested in a heavy-handed movement that wants to be like, get on board, get your Bitcoin, own it, use it, be part of the movement, because if not, you are going to be left behind. You are going to feel economic turmoil. And more importantly, like, you won't have any say in the political system of the future. And that's a decision that you made because you think that the government loves you and is here to do happy things for you. And like, I'm getting to a place that I feel really angry and frustrated because you just get the same thoughtless, idiotic arguments. It's like, well, what about the roads? And it's like, look, man, like, there's a massive difference between the political state and the bureaucratic state. There is a possibility to, like, have the bureaucratic state that, like, provides, like, services for you. But frankly, like, the cost of what's happening here, I would much rather destroy that, open it up to a truly free market, and then see what happens. And more importantly, even if it turns out that this is a gigantic bungle and that it's chaos and all that stuff, like, I'm at the place that, like, I don't care. I think that this system is so horrific, abusive, and exploitative that, like, it has captured the entire globe's population. And why that has happened is because this pedantic brainwashing around how great democracy is just a lie. And, like, it's really important that, like, the United States was not set up as a democracy. They actually saw democracy as extremely dangerous, and that's why they created a republic. And, like, that's very similar, like, up until the 20th century, senators for the United States government were not elected by the people. That was an extremely important component of how the political system functioned. Senators were elected by the House of Representatives directly. There was the idea that you needed the Senate to have that separation because what goes on in the political systems inside needed to be insulated so that the Senate could actually do real political work as opposed to pandering to the population. And so that's why we have this sort of clown worldish version of democracy everywhere now, is because, like, it turns out that, like, that's an extremely serving system to those that are already embedded in power because they can just manipulate it in the direction that serves them best. So the long answer to your question is that, like, and I get a lot of people are really scared of this for a number of very good reasons, but, like, I sincerely believe that the answer to this is a legitimate fascist movement, and I would love to see that legitimate fascist movement be an American-based one that leads in that direction, because I think what we need more than anything is a renewal of what the true American ideals are versus the deep state infinite war machine one.
Okay, so another way of describing fascism potentially is conservative nationalism, and it suddenly takes the entire edge off it. But I do think we need to just dwell a little bit more on the statement you just made, because that is quite a strong statement that you think fascism is the way forward. And you're suggesting strong leadership, a direction from whom, though? From the Bitcoin holders?
I mean, that's the open-ended question. Because, like, I don't want to do it. I don't think I'm capable of it. And I don't think other Bitcoiners are. And I think that's where this sort of new political apparatus from the internet comes, is that, like, I sort of think it needs to be led from there. But also, like, it's a pretty open-ended question. Because, like, I do think that we need leadership in a physical form as well. And so, like, I would actually love to see that, like, whatever fascist leader we choose would actually be, like, a non-individual. That, like, then maybe there is a vanguardist council around that person who, like, those people know of their identity, and part of, like, what their thing is to never expose them. And maybe there's some ongoing system of how new and different elections within the party happen. Like, I don't know. But also, like, it's important to kind of hold it. Like, the other thing is another paper I've worked on for a long time is sort of trying to go through the philological and etymological origins of these terms fascism, communism, socialism, liberalism, and sort of untie them. Because it's really important to understand, like, this all developed out of a Hegelian dialectic and viewpoints that, like, then kind of fractured into all of their own different directions. And then also, like, then fascism specifically came about as a reactionaryism to communism and the sort of things that ended up resulting from largely socialist governments coming about. And, like, it's really interesting, like, Benito Mussolini identified originally as a socialist, then as an anarchist, and it was only through anarchism that he eventually created his own theory of fascism. And I think one of the main things about that is, yeah, like, fascism very much could be seen as a conservative nationalism movement, and I want to see that as a more holistic thing. It's not that, like, I want to use America to, like, ram down our ideology towards everybody else's throats, but it's actually like, I want to have a solidarity with other people that have their own particular form of nationalism and be able to develop a mutualism of support between each other. And so it's like, I've wrote a lot about Alexander Dugin's fourth political theory. And so like, I think this new form of the political that I'm talking about, it's a very strange amalga that like it's taking components of liberalism, of fascism, and of communism. And most interesting is like it's kind of taking the most extreme aspects of all of those political theories and combining them back into like a single thing and making those radical points between them like forcibly operate together, which in itself is a Hegelian synthesis sort of thing. So like an example within Bitcoin is that like my Bitcoin is equal to the same like however much Bitcoin you hold is equal to the same amount of Bitcoin that I hold. So if I have one Bitcoin, you have one Bitcoin, totally equal. No way to make those things unequal. That's like a very communist thing of the system. An extremely fascist notion is like Satoshi chose 21 million. That was his decision alone. There is nothing about that can change that. I mean, we could go all the way to the consensus level, fork and change it, but my argument would be that isn't Bitcoin anymore. And so, like, I think these things work really well together. Same thing with, like, despite the fact that the system is panoptic, we can see everybody's transactions and what they're doing on the blockchain directly. Like, the cryptography that's imbued within that radically protects my privacy. Like, you don't have a way to overcome that. And so I think this amalga of sort of all of the different aspects that Bitcoin pulls together in synthesizing a new political system is really important and powerful. Yeah, and I hope that we'll see a movement in this direction because, like, it's very clear to me, like, the internet is unequivocally the most powerful political apparatus that has ever been developed in all of human history. And the fact that it hasn't politicized itself is pretty novel to me, actually. Like, it seems like, why isn't this thing that, 4 out of 5 people in the world participate in, like, why isn't that the political structure for the globe itself? And I think that's where we're going. It just, frankly, it needed to have its own money for itself before that could develop.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well, reflecting on the emergence of the internet, the personal computer, and the direct connection with the hippie movement and San Francisco as a site of this work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, there's a very weird connection between what you could call the California ideology, psychedelics, and Bitcoin. Like, seeing Ross talk, then seeing him get that 300 Bitcoin donation, like, it's very clear that there's an extremely powerful and synergistic relationship between these sort of this sort of radical ideology and this transformation of really oneself and your consciousness and Bitcoin itself. And like, I think those relationships are really important, and a lot of people are pretty keyed up to them and aware of them at this point, which I think is wild and cool.
Yeah. Did you get the chance to meet with Ross?
No, I didn't. I was feeling so overwhelmed after the second day that I was I don't even think I briefly went on the third day, but by noon I was just like, I am tapped out. Like, I can't keep doing this.
Understood. Just come back. You mentioned the fourth political as a concept here, and you did expand a little bit on sort of your take on that, but actually come back to the original text. Could you just share a little bit about what that means, sort of that particular writing and where it came from?
Yeah, so The Fourth Political Theory is a book by Alexander Dugin, he's been called Putin's brain. It's kind of funny because the reason I follow Dugin is that he's really the world's foremost Heideggerian expert. So, like, he's read all of Heidegger's works and commented on them. And so the Fourth Political Theory is his own approach to looking at like what the global political paradigm is, how it developed through liberalism and neoliberalism, and how, like, neoliberalism essentially slayed the prior 3 political theories, which was liberalism, communism, and fascism. And now that we, like, live within neoliberalism and sort of are watching its... and I hate this term because, like, I really use neoliberalism to talk about this form of liberalism that's, like, inherently sort of a lie to itself, and that, like, it's really just about sort of making money. Like, it's not related to liberal values at all, but it's sort of this, like, hyper capitalist idea. And I always put capitalism in quotes because, like, fiat-based capitalism systems like aren't capitalistic at all. Like that, it's a weird form of state-based socialism with like kind of variables on how socialist or not it is. And so in the fourth political theory, he sort of, and he never speaks to it directly, and he's like, this is just to do an analysis. He was like, but I think the future political theory that comes about is going to be something that sort of takes different pieces of the prior three political theories and recombine it in something that can allow for different individuals of different like ethnic origins and ethnoses to essentially reassert themselves and allow for there to be a mutualism of respect amongst those ethnoses. And so, like, to me, that is 100% what Bitcoin is. And the truth is like, I don't think Bitcoin has politicized itself at all, because there hasn't been a pedagogical approach that has really been like, look, you need to understand Bitcoin, not because like you'll get rich or anything, but because like this is really about your safety and security in the digital world in the future. And like, you need to understand how encryption works. You need to understand why you need to own your private keys. And more importantly than anything is like, you need to understand how it empowers you, because without knowing how to control your own private keys, you will always be victim to whatever happens. And like, that's what we're seeing right now with all of the collaborative custody shit, which I also just want to say, like, it really isn't that hard. It is intimidating. I want to be clear about that. It is intimidating. It's not hard. And so it's very similar to, I don't know, like doing work on your car or something. Like, before you open the hood of the car, you can be like, I don't know anything about cars. Like, this feels like way too much. And then it turns out you like open the hood and you're like, oh, like I just like move this, that, this, and like put this stuff together. And like, now it like works. It's like totally operable. It's fine. So like, I have a great chapter in my book called I think the pedagogy of Bitcoin, which is like about how like we need to approach Bitcoin in this different and radical way that's really trying to educate people about the political power that's found in Bitcoin, just as opposed to the economic power. And, you know, in the theme of the show, like, to me, that's the real transformation of value, is when you get that, like, yeah, Bitcoin absolutely has an economic value, but like the social and political value has a higher one than the economic value. And I think that's where stuff starts to really get different and more powerful, because that's not only where you choose your subjective storage of value to be only Bitcoin and forever, but you also realize that by spreading that to other people, they become empowered individuals as well. And so like what you were speaking about on the train, like I'm not interested in 95% of the population. I don't think they're useful or powerful or helpful in any way. In fact, I think like they're most likely detrimental and dangerous. What I'm really interested in is in that 5% that's like, yeah, like I'm listening. I'm fucking sick of this exploitative system too. Yeah, I don't want to work 40 hours a week and at the end of it find that I only have $5 left for myself, because that's kind of where most people are, and it's pretty insane that people haven't just lost their shit and started deciding to burn everything down.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and just kind of dwelling on this fourth political. It's interesting. It sort of looks back into the past, and we're seeing this more and more in the cultural sphere. You know, films rehashing old stories. You know, Disney's kind of doing Star Wars again for the 20th time, and there's this kind of look into the past and this recombination. And you know, just right now, I don't know if you've sort of noticed, but there's a real focus on the 90s as a fashion statement. You know, they've kind of it looks like it's out of Friends or Seinfeld. You know, some of the stuff people are wearing, and I wonder whether that also extends to this. Almost nostalgia for these parts of the past. People go back.
Well, it's funny because I think it actually relates specifically to a hauntology, and I think like that nostalgia of the past explicitly towards like a functional political system and like a relatively fair economic system is like something like, it's sort of absurdist when we have to sit here and be like, man, like, you know what'd be cool? Would be like if I only paid 30% of my income for rent. You know, it'd be great, like, if I could go to the store and not have to figure out which meal I'm not going to eat this week. Is it breakfast or dinner? I don't know this week, you know? And, like, for these very basic things, or, like, you know, like, I wish I could just, like, go to college and get, like, a good job that I could save some money, buy a house, have some kids. I mean, like, the fact that in the Western world, we're seeing a very sharp demographic fall off that's largely responsible because of the economic conditions that we've made. Like, something has gone horrifically wrong. Because, like, that... Like, it's really absurd to me to think about, like, there is no, like, 100-year vision for what America is. And if you even presented that, it would seem almost laughable to most people. And it's like, how absurdist and dangerous is that on a whole? And this goes back to, you know, why I think democracy, frankly, is really dangerous, is that, like, it wants to homogenize all of us. It wants to say, like, I'm as equal as you are, that, like, our political opinions are totally equal and viable to one another no matter what, and, like, one vote is one vote, and, like, that's just not true. And, like, it's pretty dangerous, because, like, there's a lot of people that go, well, I'm going to vote for the person that's going to give me the greatest benefits. And if I go, well, hang on, like, how is Social Security actually going to pay out if we just have a belief that anybody who sprained their ankle should just get on long-term disability and get Social Security forever? And they're like, huh? Like, I don't, just, like, give me my money. And, like, that's why we're in a situation now where, like, there is a belief that, you know, like, I'm almost 40 at this point, and, like, I'll never see any of the Social Security that I paid into this system. You know, I'm like, that's for a certainty, and, like, that's not fair. And, like, returning to the point on fascism, like, I think we're at a really dangerous place, because, like, we could do this with the Orange Party and make it kind of operable. This can go in a very different direction that, like, I've theorized about this for, like, more than a decade, but, like, I actually think we're going to get a youth communist movement that's going to be like, you know what? Why shouldn't I kill my 70-year-old neighbors and take their house? Like, I'll never be able to buy it. They got to buy it for, you know, like a half year's salary, where it's going to take me 10 years. This clearly has been unfair. So, honestly, like, why shouldn't we just have a communist movement that says, you know what? Everybody who's over 70, we're kicking you out of your house and taking your home, and, like, you can live in the camps now. And to be clear, like, that was a method that was used multiple times in the 20th century. Not just towards the old, but frankly towards the rich, which, you know, now we have this demographic problem that the old are the rich. And so, like, it's very easy to accelerate this dialogue in that direction. Yeah, and so, like, I think there's some pretty dangerous stuff coming down the line. And again, like, that's kind of why I want the fascist Bitcoin or Orange Party, is not because, like, I just want power and think that this is the only way to do it. But frankly, like, I think the alternatives are way more dangerous. And I think we need to be present to that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. You've also got this generation of children who went through COVID lockdowns and masking and psychological trauma from the state. And I don't know, maybe I don't know what that really means in 10 or 15 years' time, you know, when these people become proper adults with some kind of agency. You know, what sort of psychosis will they have after all of those Fortnite shoot-ups? And I sound like I'm calling out for a moral panic, but they've spent all this time as digital natives. They've spent all this time behind screens, behind masks, told what to do. Who knows? It could go in a number of ways. And I mean, the repression, it could be positive. There could be some great positive spin on this, but yeah, as you say, it could be quite dangerous as well.
Well, and it's interesting because this is where it kind of goes all the way back to like my original thesis, is that like Bitcoin inherently is a tool of war. Like that's why its substrate is cryptography. Like that's why it is built as it is. And so like the surveillance panopticon is large, dangerous, and powerful. And like I don't think there are many physical actors that can really overcome a lot of those places. And that's why like I think this sort of radical individualism that Bitcoin calls upon is like, if we live in this totally panoptic state, like you can still get yourself on Tor and figure out like how to acquire Bitcoin in various ways. And like that's cryptographically protected in ways that are really important. And so like, I think whatever revolution does come, like it needs to lead through the internet and use tools like this as its primary mode. Because I think anything else that's like sort of, physically based, if you will, I think is subject to failure because of just how powerful the technology is at this point.
Yeah. Well, The other thing, your fascist Orange Party, the FOP, I find it interesting because, again, I mean, some people may shut down when they hear the F word, but it's interesting, as you say, it sits alongside alternatives. And if we go back to the Weimar Republic, at these moments in the past, we look at the Chinese Civil War, these moments when there was contention for power, we have to look at what the alternatives are and what is the political proof of work that needs to be put in. Because, is the FOP far superior to the GOP in this case, and the dictate of a president, a monarch? What are the options that are on the table? Because I don't think sitting on the fence in that time of change is a valid choice. You kind of have to throw your lot in with somebody, and that's maybe something we haven't experienced since the end of history. We've just sort of been chilling.
Absolutely not. And like we haven't seen any of that kind of radicalism in America for a long time, because like our political system worked relatively well, up until the last 20 or 30 years. Not to say it was great before, but like we used to actually get Democrats and Republicans that could sit down and be like, yeah, like we're on the same team, we want the same stuff, let's figure out how to do it. Whereas largely in part because of their own work, like they have turned one another into nemesis that can't be dealt with. Like living in like the liberal utopia that I live within, like it's really insane to me, the kind of explicitly hateful dialogue that's directed towards conservatives just for them being conservative. Yeah, and I think we need to understand that where we're at economically, like this problem cannot be solved politically by Democrats or Republicans in any meaningful way. And so, like, I honestly think we have two choices that will manifest before us over the next decade. One is we get some variant of pretty radical communism. And, like, the question is how that plays out. Like, if the youths are smart, like, they can really create, like, an American-style youth communist movement that's designed to do that. And there's enough people, and they're angry enough that, like, if they can empower themselves, and this is the real key word that I'll follow up on why I don't think they can do that, it could happen. On the other side, like, I think you need a radical FOP-style movement that's going to be like, look, like, fascism's the only thing that'll solve this. We're ending the Fed unilaterally. Bitcoin becomes money for everybody in the United States. You need to manage that on your own. There's going to be a lot of economic turmoil, but there's going to be the economic freedom for you to actually operate in a market-based economy, which is fundamentally different from how the communists want to play it. They want to make the government much larger than it already is, and they're going to use that government to steal all of the wealth from all of the people that have it. So those will be your options. Now, I don't think they can accomplish that because the last 10 years of wokeism, like, look at who their heroes are. Like, I mean, like, these aren't people that I'd follow, into a grocery store, nonetheless, through a political movement. And, like, that's kind of one of the things that I find the most interesting about the Democratic monogeny is, like, they took the lowest common denominator and elevated that person when, like, most of these people can't even take care of their health, nonetheless, like, present an image for a healthy future. So, I kind of think that that's doomed. And then on, like, the more conservative side, like, I think in the United States, you could get some variant of national Christendom that would be, like, I think it would actually be dangerous because, like, it's not actually Christian. It's this weird subset that, like, they want to speak towards all of the things of, it's very similar to the GOP right now. And that's kind of why, again, I think you need Bitcoiners in the Orange Party, because they can have these radical values and present them in a way that still enshrines a lot of quote unquote like liberal social values. Like, I would brand myself as being more of a conservative individual, but like within that, like, yeah, if you want to do drugs, great. Like, you should be free to do that. You should be totally empowered to do whatever you want to do with your body. But like, we essentially need a movement that's going to embrace this economically conservative but socially liberal space that I think a lot of Americans actually identify pretty strongly with. But because we've been stuck into a dualistic political paradigm for decades, the very idea of somebody stepping outside of that framework throws most people for a loop. very similar to how when you were like, so like, how does this third party Orange Party thing work? Like I had to explain, like, it's not your traditional political party. It's actually much more of a radical vanguardist movement that, like, I'm interested in people in the Orange Party when they're like, I'm the Orange Party, and they're like, well, like, you guys will never get elected. So, like, how you can do it? And like, I want our guys to respond with, like, how fucking dare you? You're a piece of shit. This isn't about being elected. It's about calling people like you out who choose to compromise on one of the two sides that results in the same thing. And what we're really based upon is making a mark and saying, I won't identify with either of these pieces of shit that are choosing to exploit, steal, and destroy our republic for their own gain. So how about it's not about us getting elected, it's about making sure that we don't identify with you.
Interesting. You mentioned just towards the end there this national Christian idea, and I that was actually something I wanted to follow up on, because it seems as if, if we look at these possible futures that you've outlined, they're very bleak. There's kind of an edge to it, there's a hardness to it, and I often come back to, well, what is the middle way? What is the way that is maybe following in the way of Christ, something unifying that brings people together, and looking at the work of Paul and extending this to all the Gentiles, opening this thing up. Is that something maybe deeper down, not as maybe an organized movement, but maybe something a bit more spiritual, something a bit more deep in the soul that you see maybe helping alleviate some of these issues, or is it an impasse?
I definitely think on a personal level, and like I think if we got national Christendom in a way that truly imbued those ideas meaningfully, yeah, like I think it would be pretty great overall. I think the problem is very similar to like how we got a Protestant movement in the first place. Is like it turns out that like the church has done like an awful lot of corrupt and bad things. It's another paradigm of power. And in all honesty, like I would really love to see a more powerful and radical Christian movement. I think I have a pretty bad taste in my mouth about it, just because of how it has manifest in the American political scene as being sort of a variant of like republicanism. And so like if I saw a truly Christian movement that was like, yo, like fuck war first and foremost, we want nothing to do with the Republicans or the Democrats, I'd be like, right on. Like I'm like listening and want on board. And so I think if it could truly elevate these Christian ideals to their apex of as what they should be, I'd love to see that. And I think it would be really powerful and important and inspirational. Just very similar to like how I feel like when I talked about religion on a whole with my European counterparts, because of their own social inheritance, they have a relative amount of distaste in their mouth for it. And so I think that's sort of a similar experience that I have about the idea of Christian politics in the United States, because I've just seen it manifest in this sort of variant of the GOP style. I'm hesitant that it wouldn't just be more of that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Again, Jacques Ellul writing on propaganda, 1960s French theorist, and in one of the chapters he talks about, if I was to paraphrase, so the way the Christian church could use propaganda, and he sort of posits that by necessarily doing that, it's turning its back on what is the spiritual and the holy by entertaining these ideas, and it kind of becomes a non-church when a Christian church becomes political, it becomes of the world. And it's sort of, there's also the older idea in the Jewish tradition of the yoke of man or the yoke of God, and I think certainly on my own journey, starting to think about these things, because the political violence, this kind of darkness, it really is not something that I want to foster or that I want to see emerge. It's possible that it's necessary, that it's inevitable, but kind of pushing against that in a way. And I wonder if there's almost a divine role that we can look to, perhaps, in a great unification. I mean, but I don't know.
Well, this is where the internet gets really interesting. Is that like it just neutralizes the ability for political violence to find itself. And so like I wish I could speak more to what something like this looks like, but I think the internet itself and the ability to preserve anonymity and to speak to truth is like this really, really powerful vehicle. And I think if we could get some sort of organization that's about that. Because to be very clear, like, this is all part of a gigantic spiritual crisis. And the great suffering that's occurring in the world comes from an extremely deep nihilism of the belief that we can't change anything or make a difference for it. And I think probably the weirdest and the most interesting thing about Bitcoiners is that, like, I can confidently say at this point that I have met hundreds, literally hundreds of people who have had their own spiritual awakening through Bitcoin. And, like, that's insane. And, like, a lot of times, like, I've definitely had dozens of people approach me cautiously about this and being like, hey, I just, you seem like the right person to share this with because of your writing and stuff. And, like, then they're like, I was, like, an atheist. I didn't believe in God. And then, like, figured out Bitcoin and started doing all this. And then I had this, like, moment of awareness and opening that, like, I accepted God in my heart. And, like, now I'm a Christian or a Muslim or a Buddha. And, like, I really believe in that. And that's important. And I'm always deeply struck because I'm like, okay, so, like, this is actually happening. It's not, like, a unique thing to myself or just a couple of others, but there seems to be, like, some real pathway that happens. And my truth is I think what happens is that when you look out at the world today, like, that nihilism is dark and powerful and loud. And it's very easy to be like, there's no possible way that we could ever escape this. Like, the powers that be are too powerful, they're too robust, they got everything locked down. And then I think when you find Bitcoin, you do your research, you get over all the humps and novelty of it and really discover that it's actually real in what it's doing, you realize that there's this radical and extraordinary key to a lot of this darkness. And there finally becomes an ability for you to actually find a direction to guide you out of that darkness. Because before, it's just thick blackness. There's no direction to go. But then when you see this pinpoint of light of it, you're like, oh, like, I could follow that. And the thing that I think is sort of hilarious is, like, God in all of his magnificence and brilliance. So, like, is like, hey, like, let's goad them into this, like, making it about money first. And people are like, oh yeah, I'm, like, going to go towards that light where, like, you know, I could liberate myself from the circumstances and horrors that I live within. Like, as they follow it, they're like, hey, wait a minute, like, going towards the light is a positive thing. And, like, yeah, I am, like, acquiring more economic sovereignty, but I'm also realizing, like, this is part of a much bigger question. Like, is it fair, ethical, or right that some people get to print money? Is it fair, ethical, or right that this whole system of exploitation is taking advantage of everybody? And you go, no. And I have this weapon now that actually allows for me to fight them. And even cooler is, like, it's not actually a weapon, it's a shield. And, like, if I can give this shield to more people, they can protect themselves from that as well. And we can use this to actually liberate ourselves from the circumstances we're in. And so, like, I used to find it very, what's the right word? I used to find it very surprising at how many people would have a spiritual awakening through Bitcoin. But now I kind of expect it. It's kind of weird. But I've seen it enough times and consistently enough that, like, it's an actual phenomenon that, like, I'm pretty sure that it's just because there's an answer to the economic nihilism that then opens them up to the possibility of there being an answer to the spiritual nihilism as well.
Yeah, and something I think you write about quite a lot in Cryptosovereignty is this idea of Bitcoin as a messianic tool, which I think really encapsulates what you've just said. It's sort of the thing we needed at the time. It was the right thing at the right time. And certainly in this age of the consumer, the end of history, where it does not seem like there's any hope, that there's only these kind of memories of the past, we actually can go back further into that past and find that there was the same thing. Nothing's new under the sun. Great empires, Roman Empire, you know, these great persecutions, these great imbalances, and then the opportunity for redemption being available there, which if someone's so busy with their daily life, enslaved in a sense, wage slaves to an economic system that doesn't have any mobility, to have something that can help them get just their head above water enough to take a sip of breath and see that there is a great light of redemption available through God. You know, it's almost like we're completing the loop of Nietzsche's proclamation of the death of God, and we're actually rediscovering that he was there all along.
Absolutely. And I think that's why in Messianic Bitcoin, like, I just straight up lift an entire paragraph from Nietzsche and from the Gay Science 126, where he first speaks about the death of God. Because, like, I think that this is... And, like, I think God, in all of his brilliance, understood why he needed to be slaved in this nihilistic sense, was to create the opening and possibility for this radical renewal, where you realize that, like, God, in all of his beauty, grace, and intelligence, like, he didn't abandon us. He, like, created a situation where he could produce this piece of technology into the world that, to be clear, when I say messianic, I don't mean that Bitcoin is the Messiah. I mean, it exudes qualities that would be of aid to the Messiah. And furthermore, like, it allows for this possibility of an economic redemption to occur. And I think these qualities that it exudes are very important because it does it at a standstill. Like, if Bitcoin's not forcing itself onto anybody, it's a form of logic and knowledge. And so it's like the sort of, quote, redemption that Bitcoin gives you is like, if you believe in it and have faith in it, like, it's going to do what it's done over its 4-year cycles. And I think offering that to people is, like, in an age of economic nihilism, is extremely important. And I think, frankly, without it, I think there really isn't anything left that this world can kind of offer. And, like, it's really scary because, like, I've met a number of people who the idea that if you get wealthy in the world today, it means you must be a bad person. It means you're exploiting somebody. You're engaging in that process. And, like, that's kind of where the nihilism has brought us to. And that's the same reason why people don't believe in God. It's really hard to, like, how could a God give us this world? How could it be possible that evil could run so rampantly and there could be a God? And it's kind of funny because I flip it on its head, because it's like, because he loves you and he believes in you and he believes that you could actually do something meaningful and substantial to change it. But, like, he needs you. God needs you more than you need him. And, like, that's what the age of nihilism is about, is it's not about believing in God because he's magically going to save us all from everything. It's that we commit ourselves to God because we believe there is a higher and better purpose and meaning to this world, and that right now evil is winning. And it's not because God wants evil to win, but it's because we need to reflect on that evil in a meaningful way that goes, whoa, we can't do this. What are we going to do in response to it? And, like, that's pretty much the conclusion that Hannah Arendt presented in Eichmann in Jerusalem about what the banality of evil is. Like, it's, yeah, like, there's nothing original or unique about how evil operates. It just can't think. And that's why you get, you know, all of these different individuals throughout the world that have made a lot of money because they didn't think about it and they are actively engaging in evil. There's now an opportunity to actually redeem ourselves from that and say, it turns out that money actually is an ethical thing. And it's because we have mismanaged it so severely over the last century that it has become something that looks like evil. And it's because there's no thought behind it.
That's fascinating. There's a lot of deep questions here. And as I go on my own journey, you know, I look at these questions, you know, give us this day our daily bread. What does it mean to eat, to be, you know, to satisfy the body, but also realizing that we don't live by bread alone and that there's something more. And it seems as if for a long time, this precariat gig economy, people doing Uber Eats deliveries and living on the edge, you know, how did we get here? You know, these people are focusing on the body and the here and now, so busy, distracted with the piece of glass in their hand, the iPhone. They can't see that there's something beyond, and it's interesting. I think there's a lot of room for more thought and expansion on this topic, and it's still pretty niche. You know, I think you've written about it. There's a few people who've written about it, but it's still early days.
Yeah, and it's exciting to see more people actively engaging and considering it in a meaningful way. You know, and like I really love where we're at developmentally, because like these are the questions that I was always pretty hung up with, because like if Bitcoin can do what it promises to do, which it has done since the Genesis block, then there's a real potential that it could change humanity for the better and more meaningful. And this returns to the fascism thing of that, like, I think it's time that we're done with having conversations with people. Bitcoin will win. Bitcoin is better than your system, and it will continue to go up and to the right against fiat over time. And you will either learn that now or later. And furthermore, like I simply don't give people that aren't Bitcoiners, I just simply don't give them much weight at all in terms of what they say now. Because like if you've had this much time and opportunity to think about what and why Bitcoin is and how it functions, and you haven't figured it out, I just don't have a lot of empathy for you. Like it's pretty clear, and like you need to do the work. But like I really appreciated what Michael Saylor said of that. Like you're gonna spend 40,000 hours of your life working and trying to make money. It's probably thoughtful to spend 100 hours to figure out like how it works. And the truth is like I'm always pretty amazed at how uninformed most people are about money. And it's wild to me that like here's this thing you deal with every day all the time, and like you don't want to know how it works. Okay. You know, or even better is that like you don't know how it works, but you have strong opinions towards me about how it works. And like I don't know. It's just I guess it's in line with modernity and the kind of hubris that people seem to lead with.
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating project, and I'm glad, and there's people like you who are writing about this. I'm honoured to be able to have a conversation with you about it and at least broach the topics, because it seems like we're also in a very interesting time where even as theorists, as authors, you know, we're not necessarily writing about the past. You know, we're actually writing about something that's happening right now, and that's kind of a unique time to be, where the conversations you and I are having actually could go and leave these ripples that people will look back on and be like, oh, well, that was part of this project. Just like Heidegger, Carl Schmitt, these people were there at the time. They were relevant in the contemporary moment and not just historical figures. And I think we need to just keep the conversation going and have dialogue. Absolutely.
And particularly sort of these, these ones that are a bit more philosophical, and that like to me, the economic conversation's boring and solved. Like it's obvious what Bitcoin's going to do. Like I'm much more interested of that. Like, so what are the ramifications of this? Like what does it mean about our souls? Like what does it mean for philosophy? Like what does it mean for the internet? And like I think this is like one of the things I find the most intriguing is how little philosophical commentary has been offered to it. And I think that goes to show how captured philosophy is kind of within the general scheme and scope of things. Is that like philosophy is now some dry academic topic. And to me, like I never looked at it that way. To me, philosophy was always about the question of the meaning of life. Like what does it mean to be? What does existence itself mean? And what does it mean that we're here? And to me, one of the great questions about Bitcoin is that, like, I think it truly is a grander question about what does it mean to exist today? Because, like, today, you can own Bitcoin, and, like, you can go halfway around the world, and you can use that Bitcoin, and you don't have to get permission from anybody. Like, that's never existed before in the world. And that we have this magical thing called the internet, where, like, we've never met in meat space. We're an ocean apart. Like, it's totally different times of day for both of us, and yet we can relate, connect, and have this conversation, and even have a solidarity that has us believe in one another more than our entire nation state and political paradigms that we've been offered. And so to me, part of that question is at what point do we actually allow for this to be our highest form of identity, and to openly speak to that, and to say, yeah, I refuse and reject the American political establishment because I know that there are other people in the world that I have more in common with and more in solidarity with, and that I want to have a political union with those people because they have the same values as me. And it turns out these are like super normal, natural human things. Like, I don't believe that anybody should be able to steal from anybody else for any reason. And I don't think that anybody should harm anybody else for economic gain. Like, these are very fucking basic agreements. And yet, every single nation state on the planet wants to subject people underneath and beneath those to say, we have a right to hurt you if you don't give us money, and we have a right to hurt you if you don't listen to us. And like that's wrong. on an ethical, a moral, a human, and basic idea. And furthermore, like in this very Heideggerian concept, like I believe the decision to reject that alone can radically augment the world. And like I'm not interested in compromising. I'm interested in telling you I won't participate in your economic system of exploitation any longer. And you can kill me, you can try to rob me, you can do any of these things, but that's part of why I'm building Vora. Is because I want when they finally come for me and it's clear that it's over, I'll be like, yeah, you can kill me, you can imprison me, you can lop off pieces of my body, but you won't have my Bitcoin. And you know what else? My Bitcoin's probably actually going to find contracts to seek you out and make you responsible for the crimes that you're carrying out right now. So go fuck yourself.
Well, look, man, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Erik, it's exciting to hear what you're working on. Is Vora your main focus, or have you got any other writing projects you're undertaking? What else have you got planned for the year?
Vora is my main focus. My role at the company is going to be pretty weird in that, like, I don't want a traditional role or to really own it. Like, my job is really to be cultivating a culture that is truly a radical hyper Bitcoin company. And part of the idea is that, like, I'm well connected in the space. I speak to it philosophically, and like I'll probably be like our chief philosophical officer or something. Because to me, it's about, and this is where I've actually found it's really great. Is like, people are fucking sick of working for a corporation that wants to make money. And like, if you want to work for Vora, chances are you're probably not going to get paid as much as you'd be doing in other things in your field. But you know what? You're going to be working on something that makes a difference in the world and is meaningful. And you should join us if that's a project that you want to work on. Like, if you want to help Google make their ads slightly more efficient, like, yeah, go do that. I'm happy for you. But like, if you want to actually build something that could change the concourse of humanity for the better, you should come work with us. Like, we'd be excited to have you, and you'll be paid in Bitcoin. You'll get time lock Bitcoin as a bonus. And more importantly, like, you'll hang out with a bunch of fucking cool Bitcoiners all day long.
Awesome. Well, look, Erik, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And yeah, I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. I've greatly enjoyed it as well.
Cool, man.